Hey everybody, welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. I am here with John Ohman, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Development for Mortenson. Once construction, but actually much more than that. There's a large organization that does a lot of building of really big infrastructure projects and interesting projects, which I'm really excited to talk with you about. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here.
So what I find really interesting is that in spite of the fact that this is such a huge organization and does so many amazing projects, including, let's list some. I noticed the Disney Concert Hall was one that was a big one. There's some big solar projects. You guys are big into solar infrastructure. Any other like big name projects you wanna cite?
Sure. We relatively recently finished the Raider Stadium in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
U.S. Bank Stadium, lots of hospitals, cultural centers, museums. So
yeah. Very cool.
Quite a breadth of projects. We have kind of what we call our electrical and renewables businesses, and then we have our commercial buildings business, but a lot of those buildings are quite big.
Yeah. Big projects, but it's a family business, or should I say, and it's a family business. And you don't really think of, you think of mom and pop, you think it's smaller. And I think that's really interesting. And that's kind of where I want to start in this conversation, is about what it's like to work, what the culture is like. What is it like to work in a family owned business like this?
Sure. Well, I just feel privileged to work at Mortenson, and we wanted to talk about culture, and I'm part of a senior leadership team that has been stewarding a culture, and that was actually the founder of the business, or at least the Mortenson that scaled the business. I got to sit near him and interact with him over a period of years. He has since passed away, but when and by the time I joined, we were, already $1.5 billion. But my first conversation with him was about how he saw himself and his family as a steward of the business, not an owner or an extractor of value, but really being a steward. And so I think a lot of that philosophy and that care, has carried through to the senior team and shapes a lot of the culture and who we are. David is now the chairman, David Mortenson, but it's a family business in that it's family owned, so it's privately held, but it's professionally run, and the Mortenson family has hired the very best of the talent to run the business and created a great environment. So it's not about the Mortenson family per se, the company's name Mortenson, but it's really about stewarding a great business and growing it and creating opportunities for all kinds of people.
That's interesting. I wonder if that's an interesting way to think about this. I love this idea of stewarding, and where obviously you might say you have ultimate control as the family, right, or the son, or whatever it might be. And as we're all watching through Succession and whatnot, bad, right? Like that's culture gone bad. But being able to say, look, I'm going to choose to do this because it's good for the organization, and setting that precedent. How does that continue to get, and I think your purview as part of the leadership team, you're talking about how you got to sit with the original founder who is Scale It, but now there's other people, the business is evolving. The son is still there as a chairman, but how does this stewardship mentality and this culture that they've instituted, how is there a way that it gets articulated to the leadership team, or reinforced or ensured in some way?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our greatest sort of concerns and efforts, is to maintain the culture, right? I mean, just basic business philosophy, where you're going, and kind of who you are as an organization genetically doesn't change very often. How you get there and has to adapt and change constantly, right? Like any good business school would tell you.
Yeah.
But I think part of what the when our CEO took over, he spent a whole year just working on culture. And I think part of the humility and the stewardship of the culture is he didn't start with, well, let's inflict culture on others, but he said, let's start with our own team and lead by example. And which was really the way Mort and David Mortenson also run the business and own it. So kind of start with ourselves. And so we spent nearly a year as a senior team and then slowly working out from there to try to institutionalize what the culture was. Because Dan Johnson, our current CEO, arguably we were at another inflection point in the business where we were going from 2 or 3 billion up to now we're, near 6 billion. So just tremendous scale, addition of people. Yeah. And you have to, what was tribal knowledge needed to become institutional knowledge without killing the authenticity of it. When I joined, again, much smaller company, just under 2 billion, I went out to one of our annual meetings in Denver, and I met a foreman who had worked here for 20 years. And he, as a foreman in the field, he had personal experience with Mort, and he came up to me with a string of explicatives and said, I, blankety blank, bleed blue. And I said, okay. And so anyways, blue is shorthand for Mortenson. Our logo is blue, and somehow blue got into the vernacular. Yeah. And what he said to me was, back in the day when accidents and missing fingers were just part of being a carpenter, Mort said, no way, this doesn't need, it can be different, and it was, back then there was a lot of resistance and skepticism, but, began the safety journey very early, which again, he's a steward of the business, a steward of the people that work in it and have to live with it. And so anyways, this was very personal, very personal tribal knowledge that everybody had. Everybody on the senior leadership team at the time had essentially grown up with Mort, hustling and scraping and putting together great business, all kinds of adventures and risks and disasters and successes. Yeah. But as they retired, the question became, how do we maintain this ethic of stewardship, and how do we put a name to it? And so a couple of us formed a small group, and we went off and tried to capture that, institutionalize it. And what we did was basically combine, Mort used to have, say, our purpose was our purpose is to build structures and facilities for the advancement of modern society. And then he had a list of 7 values that you'd see on anybody's, all personally and deeply felt and meant and lived, but still the words were very generic. And we sort of assembled all this, and that was fine for a while. But then we got to the point where we needed some real help, and we hired some professionals that are still part of the company, Daniel Paulson, Jason Ortmeyer. And what they did was actually go to the field where all the action is, where all the hard decisions are made, and ask people what Mortenson is when we're at our best. And they really used, I don't know how many interviews they did, probably many, many focus groups, many interviews, probably, hundreds of people. And from those, they were able to distill what we call our lead blue principles. So do the right thing, we before me, and inspire what's possible. Now, context is everything. So, when you have 200 distributed job sites with all kinds of risks and ethical decisions, and there's a bunch of subtext under those 3 principles. But the point is, they listened very carefully to our people. We kind of all worked this over together ultimately. And when we published it, it just caught fire because it resonated with the very people we were trying to serve. So, kind of full circle, but it was very, very effective, and it just gave clarity. And it was, in some ways hard for the family to leave the old language, but the intent and the meaning was the same. And the new language spoke to the new generation, to the extent for years for a long time, we just thought this would be an internal language, but it slips out into our recruiting is super attractive to, because we live it, and we're not perfect, but we try. But there's, really reflective of what is. Good culture has to be authentic, right? It has to be actually are.
Yeah. Okay. So bunch of awesome things that you're just sharing, and I want to point them out. One is you're saying it slips out into your recruiting. That is what I'm trying to get my clients to do more of. It's like, this to me is the future of culture, where it's not just about the internal behaviors, but the external, how you articulate that, and it needs to be aligned. And you're saying it needs to be the same. I think that's exactly right. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, that's the definition of authenticity, right? It's the same
Bingo.
whether you're internal, external.
Exactly.
I think with all the social media channels and the way information flows, you know, we often talk internally, the lines between internal, external are, you know, greatly blurred. So you even if you want to sort of maintain two different fronts, it doesn't work.
You're not going to. Yeah, that's right. It's a very porous membrane, and it's going to get more so. And this is exactly what I see going is in moving in the future is how do you influence the culture of your communities on the outside as well? And I think that's, that's what you're starting to see. The other thing that I loved what you said is that the new articulation of those values caught fire, and they caught fire because it was so authentic. We'll use that word again. It resonated. And that is a great phrase, because that's exactly the experience that I've had when we are able to partner with an organization and really listen to what the employees are talking about, and you can then capture that in the right way. There's always this, like, how do you operationalize it? How do you activate? How do you launch it? But as soon as it got released into the world, everybody went, yes, boom, I'm going to take that and use it. And you don't even have to convince anybody to do it. And you give them the tools and they want to do it. And I think that's great. That's amazing. I love that you had we had similar experiences in that moment of transitioning and articulating. And kudos for getting down to 3. That's amazing. 7's way too many. So
I mean, there's explanation underneath the 3.
Of course. Yes, you need that.
And some of them are a little surprising too. And this is where I've appreciated some of your work, where you talk about culture not just being generically good, but distinctively good. And even in do the right thing, which sounds like just a basic moral statement. Yeah. 2 of the sub bullets on that are communicate with clarity. They say, what does that have to do with doing the right thing? Well, on a job site, in a project, withholding communication, hoping things get better. Bad news doesn't get better with age. And so just, these things are very specific to our environment and the work that most of our people do. Of course, it applies to any of us. And even in our business service groups where I work and serve, but, and also leaning into challenges, taking, stuff happens on these projects. They're complicated often, and you can point fingers, or you can lean into it and figure it out. And that's, again, when we're at our best, that's what clients say is you just leaned into it. You just figured it out. It wasn't strictly speaking your fault, but you're after it. And combine that with communication, and it provides a little color to what we mean by do the right thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you can't just put up that headline. I think about the title of the values, kind of like the Nike swoosh, right? Now it feels like everybody knows what that means. Just do it. But it's like it was defined. It's a headline. It's a logo for, right? And so you're like, do the right thing. You're like, duh, of course, but it's ownable for you all, because you are making sure that every employee, or you're hoping that every employee understands that when we say do the right thing, we're talking about transparency and communication. Right. So it's like, how do you flesh that out? How are you, let's get a little more specific and personal. What would you say? One of the articulations here is inspiring what's possible. What do you do? I mean, how does that, you're a senior vice president of strategy and development. Okay, John, inspire what's possible. What does that mean to you? How do you bring that to life?
Sure. I mean, so in my discipline, so I do strategy, and that's new markets, identification and early development of new markets. My group and myself also do a lot of marketing and sort of what we'd call sales enablement. And so in our field, when we think about inspiring what's possible as Mortenson, we've spent a lot of time building a case for and developing skills to really lead our customers. I think a contractor in the old school sense can just be always responding to things. You know, the architect drew something, it's too expensive, it's not buildable, fix this, fix that, or can be, you know, whereas with Mortenson, we've developed expertise around renewables, around sports, around healthcare, for instance. And so Inspiring What Possible is capturing that expertise and bringing it to our customers. So when they're designing a sports stadium, we can have, you know, really intelligent conversations that, you know, you're making this multi-billion-dollar investment. Let's look at how the configuration of seats and suites and special services will drive your revenue and give you a better return, right? Or if you are looking to put renewables on the grid, one of the biggest issues right now is sort of connecting those renewables to the grid, the actual interconnect. And there's, you know, large queues with utilities and all kinds of backups and problems, especially with the recent push from the IRA. And so, you know, bringing some of our other capabilities and explaining, you know, how sort of proactively building some of these assets and working with utilities can get them online quicker and bring renewables into the grid quicker. That's what we mean by Inspire What's Possible. So for me personally, it's been about how do we teach and lead our customers where we have real expertise that they need and that they want us to bring.
I see. Very good. Very cool. So you've already told me about, you've already shared a win. Do you have any fails, like culture fails that you can share with us? Because it's one of the things that I like to do is like, it's a candid conversation. You're working for this incredibly successful company. You have all these values. They're amazing. Everything's going really well. But I'd like to know, are there any, you know, what can we learn from something that didn't go as well? Is there anything that you could share that you learned from that maybe we can learn from?
Yeah, I think, well, on two levels, the process to getting to these lead blue principles, we just described it in a couple of minutes and it sounds all clean and quick, but
that's right.
it really took a number of years to get there. And I think our early attempts at just sort of adding up all the words and phrases from the past to some degree was a fail. I mean, it was a step in the right direction, but it just wasn't adequate. And it, you know, you had to think a little more deeply and really invest the time and resources to get after it and get it right. I think failure there, I mean, we have many thousands of people, many, you know, thousands of trade partners, all these jobs going at once. We have failures every day. We all fail every day.
Yeah.
And I think the question is, how do you address those failures? And so what we've tried to do, and again, when you have this many people in an organizational structure, we're not perfect in every corner of the world, but really take a culture where failure as a mistake is something we can say, okay, a bad decision was made here, or an unethical decision, perhaps. What's the learning? I mean, obviously there's decisions and things that are done that don't allow for further employment.
Right.
But there's lots of mistakes on the job site and lots of decisions that are made, and just sort of being an environment where it's safe to fail, where we're coachable. One of the second principles is we before me, and the first sub bullet under that is coach and empower others. So, you sort of have to let people fail. You have to give them some rope to try and to learn, and then not finding fault, but finding, solutions and learning from it. So just incorporating that approach to learning into culture.
So, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, if you can do that, it creates a culture of belonging and sort of innovation, and also in this day and age, you really can't afford to turn over good team members just because they made one bad decision, or
Right.
Again, we've all failed at points in our career. So
one of the principles of this learning from failures, and it sounds like this is what you're doing with your team, is making it okay to fail. Not that people they won't want to, obviously, but
right.
What you're doing is actually building up psychological safety and trust. And that is the key to a really, like, if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to have this authentic culture that you're aspiring for. And so when I think about well, maybe I'll have you answer the question, which is, one of your team members messed up on something. What's the process? How do you point it out and make sure that it's okay? They understand that, but they also understand the severity of it. Like, what's the right way to do this? Because I think a lot of leaders have a hard time with this, right? Like, they either go too hard or not enough. They don't, no conflict. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I'm not exact. I mean, it's obviously a broad question. It would depend on the kind of screw up or
Yeah,
the
right.
nature
I
of
know.
But I can give you an example. We have a leadership development program that started about the same time that I started, about 11 years ago. And for a year, they come in for sessions. They have a team that they work on to solve a company problem. Senior leaders come in and spend an extraordinary amount of time with them when they're in town for a week. And just really, we have customer leadership and ethics and building. We have all kinds of different topics in the different sessions. And, one of the teams took their night out on one of the nights a little too far, or a lot too far. And, some behavior that just didn't reflect well on Mortenson. And, they're on Mortenson time and Mortenson expense account. And so I know in other companies I have been in that would have been cause for dismissal. Here, very frank one-to-one conversations were had with each of those team members. And, some evaluation was made of sort of who drove it and what happened and who was really involved in the end. And, those that really needed to rethink their behavior weren't fired, but they were dropped from the program. What's interesting is a couple of them were reinvited the next year. So it's not that decisions don't have consequences. The question is, can we be a company where you can learn and where there can be, second chances where it's appropriate and relevant? Again, there's always things that can happen that don't allow for second chances. So that's an example of something we went through and really agonized over, quite frankly, as a senior team, because we spend an enormous amount of time with these people. We like them, we love, it's just part of our culture and critical leaders for the future. And here this thing happened. So that's one example of how we handled it.
I think that's great. I so appreciate you sharing that. I think we all, in one form or another, have heard of or been part of that type of, mistake. And to sort of, I think that's almost like a quintessential corporate error, perhaps. So
Yeah.
to be able to
Yes,
understand how you handled it, I think that's really good.
There's other kinds of mistakes too. We just talked about one today in a operations meeting where, more technical mistakes, a concrete pour was made and the concrete wasn't kept cool enough and it failed. This is a year ago. The team, and these mistakes cost a great deal,
Yeah, they cost a lot of money.
Like a lot of money. So it had to be ripped out and fixed. This enormous mistake. Well, the team that made the mistake has put together a best practice and is sharing that mistake with the rest of the company. So there's sort of a we before we moment, or we before me. And, that's not easy to do, right?
No,
but there's
we not only did I mess up, I'm admitting, but I'm going to announce it to the entire organization.
Yep. And I'm going to share in the hopes that you can learn from my, my technical error, operating error, and that this won't happen again for the sake of the company. So, that's never easy to do. And I'm not saying everybody's just running to the, running to the stage to share their mistakes, but it is a culture where that is respected and really appreciated. And we do see that from our leadership. So hopefully
that's,
when somebody does that, that's leading by example. And hey, could save the company a lot of money in the long run. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, let's use the mistake and the money that it cost us to actually educate and insulate, right? It's an education.
Yeah.
So, John, that's amazing. I really appreciate you spending some time with us, coming on Great Mondays Radio. John Ohman, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Development for Mortenson. I'm really excited to kind of see you all, continue to watch you all, what you say, build for the greater good, get into solar, and the, all of the amazing work that we're going to need in America now to really push things forward. So you guys are obviously part and parcel of that. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing some of your wisdom, your earned wisdom from some of the failures and mistakes and wins.
Earned and learned.
Yes, I love it. Earned and learned. Doing the right thing, putting we before me, inspiring what's possible. Amazing. Really, really interesting conversation. I really appreciate you spending time with us. Thank you, John.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Josh.